Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another episode of the strategy series. Today we're talking about how to counter Red Jiren. Now don't get me wrong, Red Jiren's not a crazy overbearing deck in the format by any means, but I do suspect it'll be the most popular red deck at Nationals. It does have the results from the previous format to back it up. It did also manage to top the Pro Support TCG weekend, where there was actually a lot of red, so I do expect red to pick up some steam. And out of the red decks, I do suspect Jiren to be the most popular. I think it's got a lot of good things going for it. I think it's one of the newer red decks, so people are more excited about it. Red Broly I do think is also really good. I do already have a countering Red Broly video on the channel, so feel free to search that up if you want some tips on how to deal with that deck. But today we will talk about Red Jiren, so if you're new here, be sure to subscribe, hit that bell so you never miss a video. And if you guys want to help support the channel, there are many ways to do so down in the description. But today, if you want to buy or pre-order any of the cards we talk about in today's video, it really does help out if you click on the link to TCG Player in the description. Anyways, let's get started. So we always start these videos by talking about what the strategy we want to counter aims to do, right? So we have the Jiren leader, and a lot of what the strategy does revolves around the leader. So on the unawakened side, you can free play your one drop U11s by looking at the top 7. You feel so good when they miss, and they play like a weird number of one drops usually. Like it's somewhere in the ballpark of like 12ish, maybe even sometimes 11. So it's not like crazy unlikely that they'll miss, but you know they'll hit more often than not, right? But when they miss, you feel really good about that. But anyways, they get to evolve during your opponent's turn. That talks more about the Unison, which we'll get to later. The backside of the leader can get very big when they start evolving their different Jirens, so that's something you gotta watch out for as well. That leader swing can be very threatening, especially backed up by a Champa. But their biggest boss monster, which is actually dropped very early in the game, is Jiren Zenith of Power. This gives them huge attackers, gives them board removal, and it just comes down for super cheap. So this is one of the main cards we want to think about when we're looking at how to deal with Jiren. The other thing that I keep in mind is red staples. So Jiren's a red deck. Red has very strong staples that have carried red decks throughout various formats. Now red wouldn't be necessarily classified as the top color, but the different staples are still very important to consider. You got to consider Violent Rays and how that interacts with your deck, whether you're a deck that relies on swinging with 20k battle cards or not, or even Unisons. They do also have Testing the Opposition, which is just, you know, a great negate. Every color has them, but reds is especially good because if they don't block with it, they can combo with the token later on. One thing to consider though is they don't have access to King Vegeta's Imposing Presence because they're not a mono red Saiyan leader deck, but you do also worry about Yamcha Merciless Barrage. I wouldn't say this is the craziest format for Yamcha. We've talked about in the past how Yamcha is good or bad depending on the format. It's been really good in formats like Mecha Frieza format, for example, where people are playing Unite Assemble, lots of small battle cards by skills. I wouldn't really say this format is a crazy one for Yamcha, but still, depending on the deck that you're playing, Yamcha can be higher impact, so you do have to really watch out for that. Controlling their Unison can be a really good way to play around that. And then Broly Crown Retribution, this is an incredible card for red coming out of the sideboard, especially if you're playing a slower mid-range control deck. You're probably going to leave energy up more often than not, so they can play this, look at your hand, either bait out your counterplays or just pick whatever they want out of your hand and gain that hand knowledge, right? So this is one of the most popular cards coming out of the red sideboard. Don't be surprised though if they're even maining like maybe 2-3 copies. I definitely would not be surprised about that. So these are some of the red staples you got to consider, not just tied to Jiren, but Jiren will be playing them, of course, so definitely be mindful of them. First thing though, in terms of countering the deck, is talking about the Unison. Now, not every single Jiren build plays the Unison, but the ones that do definitely want to play around it by evolving the opponent's turn, and that can give them different interruptions. Like for example, they can Yamcha counterplay, and then they can evolve during your turn playing Jiren Devastating Might. That gives them a total of minus 25k to apply to some battle card, right? So taking their Unison down to as low markers as you can, or just removing it from the board, is a really good way to hinder their ability to play the game, because their leader, keep in mind, will play a lot of their one drops in rest mode, and so will Topo. So you can attack into them a lot of times, but if they have the ability to evolve over them, that's going to change that from attacking like, you know, a 5k battle card to attacking a 15k battle card, where you know, your attacker might not be big enough to actually clear it if they have the ability to evolve. Again, especially if it's a Devastating Might, where maybe you're swinging in with a 15k at their 5k. Well, they just evolved Devastating Might, minus 10k or 15k. Now you've got a 5k going into a 15k, and you're not able to clear it, right? So sometimes it can be really advantageous to clear their Unison. I think this is one of the biggest sideboard cards for Jiren, Dark Power Black Mass Saiyan. This card has been a really big coverall in previous formats. This format and the past couple, I wouldn't say BMS is like as crazy as it has been, but it has its like, you know, times in the limelight, right? And against Jiren, that's a big one. This pretty much hinders their leader effect from playing one drops as well as their Unison from playing one drops. While you have this guy on the board, it is very, very tough for them to get their engine going. Now, Jiren can out this with their main deck alone. They can out this by playing a one drop and then evolving into Devastating Might. You guys may have noticed Devastating Might is a key card we talked about a lot already. You're going to want to keep that card in mind a lot of the time. But what that forces them to do, it forces them to have that combo in their opening hand. They got to play a one drop, either draw a card or fish for the top 5. Maybe they find Devastating Might. But by doing that, you're basically hindering them from finding a one drop through their deck. And a lot of times Jiren players will put one drops back into their deck from the mulligan so that they can find them off top 7. So you're hoping for that. You're hoping to play BMS that they don't have the combo in hand to clear it. And the longer the game goes where they can't clear BMS, you're gonna have a pretty good time. Now, don't get me wrong, don't be surprised if they do clear BMS, but again, you can always play another copy. That can always work out as well. So BMS, very, very good card against Jiren, especially if they have a bit of an awkward start with their hand. Next up, you want to consider board wipes because Jiren does go very, very wide. So Kami Global Unifier has been a card that's seen play in more recent formats when decks like this have gone really, really wide. So it's a card you'll want to consider. Although the downside of Kami is he does not clear the 5-drop Jiren or the 8-drop Jiren. That's where you may want to consider a card like Unexpected Turn, where you can counterplay the 8-drop or the 5-drop. It still won't clear any established 8-drops or 5-drops, but still, like, they have to go really, really wide. They're an aggro deck. They want to put a lot of pressure onto the board. So Unexpected Turn can get a lot of value against Jiren and wipe all their one drops. Nice thing about Unexpected Turn as well is that it ignores barrier when it wipes all their one drops. And Kunshi is a card that can give all their one drops barrier besides itself. So being able to wipe all those, ignoring that, is a great way to stifle their aggression because they just lost a ton of different pieces to evolve over, as well as their defensive capabilities because if they have the Unison lined up, they no longer have one drops to evolve over. So Unexpected Turn can be really, really good against them. I would say though, you want to definitely take a look at where these cards can be relevant in other matchups before you just like side them for Jiren, right? Like, I think in going into nationals, you want to have your sideboard be a little bit more widely applicable. So if you can justify these cards in other matchups, that's great. Side them. They'll be great against Jiren. Same thing with BMS as well. I wouldn't just say side these 3 cards for Jiren alone. If you can justify other matchups where they will put work in, definitely consider these cards. Then, of course, we're playing against an aggro deck. You got to consider all these different floodgate negates. For green, for example, you have Dorm Potential Unleashed, as well as Boo Unadulterated Malice. Yellow, you've got Robotic Riposte, you've got Flying Nimbus, you've got Forbidden Power coming out of set 15. Oceanus Negate is pretty much a coverall. Any deck can play it. So if you're playing a deck where maybe you feel like you don't necessarily have great floodgate options, Oceanus is a card you can strongly consider. And it's still really hard for Jiren to push through, right? Like, even though it doesn't necessarily hinder them with like a card in hand or tapping an energy like Robotic Riposte, if they're going through their deck rather quickly, they need to mill a lot of their deck to get attacks through. Keep in mind, Oceanus herself is also a blocker, so the first attack, as long as they can't clear Oceanus, they'll mill 4 cards and you'll just block it. So they just milled 4 cards for no reason, and that can also be followed up by other negates you might have in your deck, right? So if they take the Oceanus challenge, they can get severely punished for that. One thing you'll want to keep in mind is counterplays from Jiren's part. So firstly, again, Broly Crown can look at your hand and pick out any battle card floodgates you might have, so you want to keep that in mind as well. Like, yellow can play around that a little bit because you only need 1 energy for Robotic Riposte, but Oceanus, you can't really play around that too much. The other thing you want to keep in mind is a card like Beerus Ball, right? Like, that can stop Robotic Riposte, that can stop Oceanus. So these are things you'll want to keep in mind. Luckily, Jiren is not a multicolor deck, so they'll have to pay 1 for Beerus Ball. And anytime an aggro deck has to dedicate energy to counterplays, that's just less energy they have to, you know, aggro you with, right? So that's just kind of a win overall. Although it can hurt a lot if your floodgate gets counterplayed. And then, guys, we have Mutato, Skill of a Sage, and Release from Evil. These are just good options for yellow decks to deal with the 8-drop. Yellow is just really, really good at dealing with big boss monsters, especially ones that are overcosted. So like Mutato, for example, is a great one. You basically tap it down on play, and then they can no longer use the activate main to restand it. Release from Evil, pretty much same thing. Doesn't care what energy cost it is, but it does negate the skills and prevent it from switching to active mode. So with a card like Release from Evil, you do still have to deal with that initial attack, but it's 1 damage coming in as opposed to a potential 4 damage coming in, right? So that can be really, really good. And then finally, just some other options. You have Bigamore in green, so if you're playing Cell Surge, for example, or maybe a rogue green deck like Go Tanks or Boo, you have the ability to halt their 8-drop and 5-drop from attacking, and those are their biggest threats, right? The 8-drop and the 5-drop having potential dual attack. Those cards can hit really hard, and this also has like a dual purpose against like Gogeta Xeno, right? So this can be a really good card for green to stop two probably popular matchups. And then Dirty Burst is another example. This only really hits their 8-drop. I feel like blue already has a pretty good matchup against red Jiren anyway, but I did want to include a blue option just so you guys had it. Another thing you can include for black would be like maybe Brainwash no more. Petrification is also a really great option for black decks. There are a lot of different options you can use to deal with big boss monsters, and that's the thing about Jiren, right? They go wide on the board, but they also have a boss monster, so you got to worry about them going wide and going tall. So you kind of want to consider like what the best option in your deck is going to be to combat that. Like maybe your deck just naturally deals with wide boards pretty well, so you want to tech more for their boss monster, or vice versa. Maybe you're playing yellow, you already have good answers to boss monsters, and you need something a little bit extra to deal with wide boards. You got to strongly, consider that, sit down, think about it. But hopefully some of these options have helped you out in your siding process and building process against Jiren. Let me know what you think in the comments below, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.